Mixenden is a lovely place. As far as I'm concerned, they're rate people, what I call rate folk. I love people watching. I was down here the other week and a couple of lads from Ambleton Drive, and he's getting on bus with his mother as his kid. Rate folk. This is proper people. And she said, Charlie, when we get on bus today, you're 4. He went, but I'm not. I'm 5. She went, just for today, you're 4. He went, but I'm not. I'm 5. And you know I'm 5. She said, just for today, say you're 4, we'll have more money for sweets and crisps when we get into town. He still have a go. So they got on bus. She went, 1 please. He went, hang on a minute, love. Hang on. What about him? She said, he's 4. He said, how old are you? He said, 4. He said, when are you 5? He said, when I get off this bus. They're proper people, aren't they? What I call rate folk.
My name's Lee Roberts, I'm a comedian and I was brought up near Mixenden. Now getting a comedian to introduce a video about the history of Mixenden might seem like asking for trouble, given the amount of jokers that live in the place. But folk in Mixie are the first to laugh at themselves, and if I make fun, it's only because I love the place and the people. But the history of Mixenden isn't a joke. Mixie is more than just a troublesome housing estate, it's more than just the newspaper headlines. Before anything else, Mixie is a community with characters as rich and as varied as you'll find anywhere. Nowadays, when people talk about Mixenden, they usually mean the housing estate, but forming its northern boundary lies a small village that is the foundation for what came later. For most of its history, the world bypassed Mixenden village, and what changes there were small and gradual. Families like the Hoosons, the Taylors and the Moores have lived in the village for centuries. John Moore, born and brought up in Mixenden, can trace his family back more than 400 years.
The first one that we know about were a Moore that came from North Arnhem into Mixenden. And the reason they know about him is because when he left North Arnhem and came to Mixenden, which were in Ovenden then, you know, he had to sign some sort of an agreement. Because if he went on poor law in Mixenden, he had to be returned to North Arnhem. You had to go back to the place where you were born if you were thrown onto poor law. Oh, here we are. Daniel Moore, born 6th of November, 1626. Married at Ipperham to a woman called Dobson. And that's sort of the earliest concrete evidence that we have of the, you know, the original of our family. And then the next descendant were James Moore, 1755. He was baptised at Illingworth. Then there's a John Moore, born 17th of May 1797 at Longhouse Farm, and died 1863, age 65. Married Mary Calvert of Wainstalls, you see, so he didn't go courting of a fardy down, not wear his boot leather now. And so it goes on. You see, there's such a lot of them, as you can well imagine. A lot of them were farm weavers. They kept a farm and wove, you know. And then, of course, when that died out, when mills took over, they farmed as well. A lot of them were farm and labourers, you know, supposed to pick up a bob or two wherever they could. In those days, and this is Calvert, born 31st of January 1846, that were my great-granddad, they got killed. Next door neighbour smacked him over the top of the head with axe. Didn't do him a lot of good.
Like every isolated community, life in Mixenden centred around 3 institutions: the church, the pub and the school.
Mixenden Primary School was built in 1887. My dad went there. And all my aunties, you know, that lived here, we all went there. All my cousins that lived down at Mixenden Stones, they all went there.
There was always something going on in the playground.
Yes.
Seasons.
We used to stay for netball after school.
But you had whip and
tops,
didn't you?
And hopscotch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything seemed to go in, and marbles.
Yes.
Everything seemed to go in seasons.
And
didn't it?
conkers.
Yes.
And then the big garden at the back of the school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that was great.
Great. Yeah.
And they used to Willie Pickles, Teddy's
Teddy.
dad. Used to have a man come with a performing monkey.
I don't remember.
We used to pay a penny at dinner time to go and watch this performing monkey in the farm, behind the farm gate.
Yeah.
One of the old teachers, what did they call her?
Miss Jackson.
Miss Jackson.
Miss Jackson.
Yeah.
She used to swap me and my brother biscuits for our homemade buns and jam tarts. And she was very happy, and we were very happy.
Yeah.
Because we were a bit stalled of Mother's baking all the time.
And you remember Miss Dilworth?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a teacher. And
Yes.
Miss Sutcliffe, the headmistress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was Mr. Mitchell.
Mr. Mitchell
Yeah.
before.
And then Mr. Ashworth came after Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah. Mr. Tisdale.
Yes.
Yeah. Tiddy.
Today.
Mr.
Did
Kirkman,
He
Mr.
used to
Kirkman, he had a
stutter, didn't
motorbike.
he?
Yes,
Yes,
he
he
did.
did.
Children, we were just...
People made their own entertainment before the war, and as well as playing second fiddle in a band, John Moore's idea of fun was rearing chickens.
We've always kept chickens, always. Grandad used to breed buff rocks, but my dad always had some. And of course, when I were old enough, I'll be about 3-year-old, my dad says, I'll get you some bantam eggs. I know I had to go with him, and he got hen settled like, and I had to go with him, and he keep giving me egg, and I had to keep pushing them under hen. And then every day at dinner time, my mum used to take me across, lift sack off, let hen out, give it some corn. My mother used to time it with a wristless watch, 20 minutes, shove it back on, you know. And that was my first experience of chickens. And as I say, I kept them ever since, like, you know. Kept a few during war. That was an experience. They were a good one, you know. I were getting 6 bob a dozen for eggs. Unheard of, man. Unheard of. 6 shilling a dozen in 40s. Good Lord. Chap that lived at top, I tell you about Gilbert Whiteley. He was a big show, man. Anyway, one day he says, I phone you this cockerel, you see. And he says, it's a good one. Best I can find you. So Aki says, well, how much is it? He says, £10. My father went through war. I think my father was on about 8 quid a year. Oh, wouldn't have that much wage, you know. Anyway, he bought it, did. Me and our kid, we bought this. But it were a good one. It were a good one. Anyway, we sent it to Scunthorpe, and it wasn't best to show. That'd be early 50s. And a lad wrote back and said, I've enclosed an open cheque. You fill a mountain and send me bird. And our kid said, not likely. If it's worth that much to him, it's worth twice as much to us. So he sent cheque back. Damn me, fought it after cockerel deed. Dropped down dead, heart attack. But we got a lot of chickens off it, so it didn't matter, you see. There's a bonny cockerel here, if you can get a picture of him. I don't know whether you can or not. Come on, Rastus. Come on, then. Gone right, Cora. Come here, you stupid bugger.
Right up until the 1950s, Mixenden was a quiet, isolated village, hidden away at the top of a pleasant little valley, surrounded by farms, fields and woods, and that's just how the locals liked it.
There was absolutely nothing in Mixenden, only farms.
But this, I was born at Jumpers, which is lower down, and there was nothing, as I say, only fields.
As I walk in from Mill Lane, coming into Mixenden village, there was the pub at the bottom, Crown and Anchor.
Yeah.
Dockshire. He was landlord there, with Dockshire. I used to go to all these, you know, galas and stuff, and he'd top hat and if I remember rightly, a Union Jack waistcoat, you know, and and that stuff. For Shire Ales, you see. So he was known as Doc Shire. That wasn't his right name, and I can't remember what his right name was. Fletcher's kept it when I was a lad, before war. In fact, they keep it during war. Oh, they did. He was a barber in town, you know, hairdresser. In fact, we all used to go there to get his hair cut. Sunday morning at tap room. Queued out, cutting your hair at tap room. Shilling, I think it was.
Then there was the butchers and post office on the right.
Freddie Butch.
Yeah. And then higher up again there was Eddie Y. Smith, who had the cobblers.
Yes.
And he sold school shoes and Wellingtons. And then there were Mrs. Scott's up the steps, and she sold everything.
Everything, yeah.
Bread, confectionery, cotton wool.
You name it.
Yeah, bobbins of cotton, everything she sold. Sweets, loads of sweets.
When did the co-op
Then there
come?
was the co-op,
Yeah.
yes, and the co-op sold coke and paraffin in the building offside, and across the road from the cobblers was the fish and chip shop,
Yes.
and the Hare and Hounds pub.
Pub.
Yes.
Yeah. When did
Mrs. Crowther.
Crowder,
Yes.
the
Yes,
fish shop?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was Kershaw,
Fish and chips
Mrs.
and
Kershaw
Halifax.
before
At the
Mrs.
time.
Crowder.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yvonne Kershaw. She used to give me mum a, and she used to come out of the fish shop at Sundays sometimes when we were going down from Moorent Chapel and give me mum some cold fish from Saturday night.
Night. Yeah.
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 Well, Mrs.
Yeah.
Crowther's husband used to come on to Brookhouse with a big basket.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
He did.
Selling
Yeah.
shellfish and
Yeah.
Yeah.
and fish.
Well, he used to. At one time, he used to set off, and my brother wrote a poem about that, and it was, he used to set off, and he had this basket, and he used to be going round calling out, hot fish, and then when it got an hour later, he was going around, cold fish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Cecil.
Well, they were
Cecil
cold when they
Crowder.
got to Brookhouse.
well, they would
Yeah.
be, wouldn't they?
He had the fish shop at Moor End as well. At one time, she ran one and he ran the other.
Oh,
I didn't
Put
know
more in.
I didn't remember.
Yeah,
one.
there were a little wooden hut place offside at Shoulder Mutton pub.
Yes, it was fun. I think everybody knew everybody else, and you could leave your door open. Yeah,
Oh, yes.
and I mean the neighbours were there. You didn't live in one another's pockets, but they were always there if you needed them. And you sit out. I remember Grandma sitting out in an evening on the step talking to the neighbours, things like that.
However, in the late 1940s, as the country found its feet after an exhausting war, local councils began to develop their visions for the future. People wanted life to improve, and there was a desperate need for better housing. Like many northern towns and cities, Halifax was struggling to meet its housing needs. The solution Halifax Borough Council came up with was to build wherever they could. Why they chose to develop the little village of Mixenden, who knows? But within 5 years the landscape was literally changed forever. There was plenty of work in Halifax, and people started arriving from around the country and settling in the new estates in Ovenden and Mixenden.
We resented it, of course.
But
I mean, we knew that people had to live places, and
Yeah.
and I'm not running Mixenden down in any way whatsoever, because there's a lot of nice people in Mixenden. But
we were
we
in the
didn't
country.
like it because it was ours, and it was no longer ours, was it?
Yeah, but
As the estate grew and more houses were built, more and more people arrived. Most came from Halifax, but many came from different parts of the country.
Well, the main reason why I came to Mixenden, when I was in London, I was living in London, I have a very ill baby. They got fluid on the brain. So therefore, they told me if I want to assist the baby, I got to move out of London because the smog in London was not good for the baby. So when I get the reply, they told me that they find me a house in Halifax. I didn't even know where Halifax was. I never heard the name before. I thought it was Canada. So I come to Halifax. And when I came here, I never regret it. I wish I didn't stop in London. I wish I did come say how does it feel at Halifax at first. Yeah, I like it here.
My
mum first came to live in Mixenden in 1952 and I lived there. From there I moved on to Stanley Drive. For a time I lived on Eiley's Road in a double house with 6 bedrooms, at which time I fostered up to 8 children and then moved back down onto Clough Lane. So basically I've never ever lived anywhere else other than Mixenden. When I first came to live in Mixenden, there was a lot of fields. Where my mum lives on Clough Lane, there was no houses behind, so the fields, when you undrew your curtains in the morning, the cows used to be there from the farm, so it was very much open land, and then gradually it sort of all went up in the 50s.
We moved up from Ovingdon, Stanley Drive. It was a strange place at that time because it was all fields, and a lot wasn't built then. Our street was sort of narrow, and Stanley Drive, it seemed so wide, you know what I mean? And then you got these spanned with these greens, you know? And the people were outside and they were all chatting to each other in the gardens, 2 or 3 houses down and things like this. And it was wonderful, and they all made you right welcome, you know what I mean? It was like the new world. They were still building the houses. Planks everywhere, piles of clay, mud. So all the pavements and that weren't done. And still when I left school it weren't done, and when I started getting dressed up it got a little bit annoying, because if it were raining, you know, your shoes would be all polished, because in those days you had to be dressed up to go anywhere, and you had to wear a tie, you know what I mean? And if you went in pub, you know, it was suit or nothing, you know.
In 1979, in October, I took this post office over, so it's around 28 years completed, nearly.
I remember when they was putting the flats up, building the flats, the scaffolding came down. I think it probably be 63, 64. I can remember I was coming home on the bus from work and they couldn't come down by the flats. We had to cut through Roper Green because the scaffolding had come down and men had come down with the scaffolding.
I was left as a one-parent family, and I had been to Mixenden before, so I liked what I saw, and that's the circumstances, and I did like Mixenden. Now then, I was in the flats when I first moved to Mixenden, and they were very nice. You know, I enjoyed being in the flats. The only thing is, when you have flats and young children, it's not as easy for them to come out to play. But no, I think we had some good people come out of the flats as well. You know, I quite enjoyed them then, yes.
The shipyards were closing down where I worked in Clydebank in Scotland, and I came down here to work at Hartley & Surgeons Engineering.
In 1950, my dad had to come out of the army. He'd done his time, and we were coming back to Halifax, because that was where my dad came from. And when we actually got back to live in Halifax, we hadn't got a home. Our home wasn't ready, and we were split up as a family. I stayed with one auntie, and my mum and dad stayed with another auntie and uncle. But eventually we lived in a house. We moved to this house on Cousin Lane, and that's where I spent my teenage years. And then I met my husband, and I got married as a very, very young girl of only 19 in 1955. And my husband and I went and set up home in a little cottage out at, some say it's Ogden, some say it's Mixenden, but this little cottage was at Brookhouse. We stayed in our little cottage until 1960, when our little boy was then 5-year-old. So we applied to have a council house anywhere. Anyway, they came back and said, no, we were adequately housed in this little cottage that had no gas, that only had gas, didn't have electricity, we didn't have a bath, we didn't have hot water, but no, we were housed, so we weren't entitled to a council house. And this little bit of money that we'd saved up, we went off to Blackpool and we had a holiday.
And when we came back, we had this letter waiting for us. So